I am so excited to see you. Again, I was thinking about how we met, and we need to give a big shout out to Elliot Kotek as being our matchmaker. We sat down.
He said that the universe would explode when we met.
Totally, and I think he was sort of right. Like, we have not, if we were in the same room, we would not have stopped talking since. And so I guess it's good that there are these breaks in between where we get to go do our work and then come back and talk again. But I've missed you, and I love following your work, and I think you're doing extraordinary stuff. So I'm excited to introduce the world to Leyla Acaroglu.
Oh, that was very good, Nancy.
You know what? Thank God for your Wikipedia page. I'm like, I have known this woman for years and never knew how to pronounce her name. And yesterday I'm like, oh my God, so it's much easier than I gave it credit for. And Dr. Leyla. It's probably just easier if you give a bit of your introduction of yourself. But I'll just say thank you for joining us for Femme Futurists Society for a series of conversational interviews. For those who might be tuning in for the first time, I'm Nancy Giordano, and this is not just a collection of my friends and the people that I adore, but it does so happen that I have amazing friends that I do adore that are creating and shaping the future. And so this idea of futurist extends beyond just the idea of a foresight professional, but it's somebody who's actively out there building the future that we want to be a part of. And you are right at the center of that and the heart of that, and helping other people and empowering other people with the tools and things that you create. So I'm excited to share with the world all the things that you do. I mean, it's really you're so prolific. Like, it's amazing. Like, we get one little document out, I'm like, look how pretty. I'm like, oh my gosh, you've got series and cards and 27 different versions of this stuff, and your philosophy about how you share that stuff so publicly. So, so welcome. And
I'm excited to be here with you.
Phil, why don't you tell us who you are, and then I'll punctuate with the pieces that you might not include.
Sure. Okay, well, I am a designer and a sociologist. I am pretty committed, i.e. possibly obsessed with sustainability and design for sustainability. So using design as a catalyst for social, environmental, and economic change, which is what sustainability stands for, so that the future is better than today, because I would hazard a guess that it's very hard to find a human alive on the planet at this moment in time who doesn't want a better future than the present or the past, even if their version of the future differs to others and so forth. But I think collectively, as a species, we're very much focused on making things more effective as we move forward into the future. So I've done a bunch of different things to that end with my sustainability obsession. I have a design agency. We create tools that help people think differently about the world. I've done a lot of work in education, but non-traditional education. So I started a school for adults called the Unschool of Disruptive Design, and we run programs all over the world, but now digitally all over the world. And I also started a farm project in Portugal where I personally wanted to learn about how nature solves problems and challenged myself to become a farmer, not just in an organic way, of course, but just because I was very disconnected from the way systems work around me in the natural world. And yeah, over the last 3 years, I fully restored and regenerated an old olive farm and have learned mind-blowing things about the beautiful, incredible, magical world that we are blessed to live in. So yeah, I like to challenge myself and the people around me to think and do differently, and to be always at the edge of their comfort, and to be, I guess, open to the chaos and beauty that is around us. And so I use a lot of systems thinking as well as design. And yeah, I guess I'm just really passionate about helping people make change and seeing the future work better than today.
So the three pillars, as I was looking again at one of your talks last night, right, were systems, and then sustainability, and I forgot
sustainability and design. Yeah, they're the three pillars that the Unschool and my work is based on. And the idea is that in an integrated way, if you understand that the world is made up of complex, interconnected systems that are dynamic, and that you understand that there are that the kind of essence to life on Earth is to sustain itself, and you can work within that philosophy of like the kind of bigger picture philosophy, but also the kind of more defined philosophy of sustainable development, which is the social, economic, and environmental considerations, or the harmonization of those things, not one greater than the other. And I say that because obviously economics is often overriding natural systems or social values. And then of course design. And design is one of the most powerful tools that humans have created. We have constructed our world to meet our needs. Every single thing around us has been created by the minds of the human species. Unless you're like literally naked in a forest, you are interacting with the designed world, although most forests these days have been influenced by humans over the millennia. So we are this incredible force on the planet for both good and bad outcomes. And I personally think it's the most fascinating and scary thing at the same time, that we've constructed our world to meet our needs, and we've terraformed the entire planet to be predominantly at the beckoning of our desires, whether it be how we use agriculture or how we mine materials or the waste that we produce, whether that be air pollution or ocean plastic waste. And that in that we've created this incredible life for a lot of people, but we've done it at the expense of the things that sustain our lives, which to me is like this big reckoning that we have to come to terms with. And that for me was my own journey. You know, I didn't learn that everything in the world was interconnected until I was 19 years old. And I was like, why the hell didn't anyone tell me this? Like, this should be the first thing you get drummed into your head, that like,
how did you learn that? Like, tell me about, like, what was the thing that kind of made it the term?
Yeah, well, I was studying product design, and I had this crazy old lecturer who was very old. I don't know how old he was. And I just have this very strong memory of like walking into a classroom and the guy opening a textbook to like page 56 and being really like not very excited about this, okay? And he was like, so we're going to talk about this thing called the Gaia Theory, which is that everything in nature is interconnected. And I remember this so distinctly. There was like a photo in the textbook. You know, textbooks, how they have like photo and then like text in like these, you know, columns. So this small photo with like a figure 1 point something or other. And it was of a tsunami. And it was like, you know, basically explains the chaos theory and that, you know, tsunamis and the relationships between butterfly theory and all this stuff in this like pretty non-interesting way. And it was like my brain exploded. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And especially the Gaia theory, which was like this study done by James Lovelock in the 1970s, which literally looked at like atmospheric, I can't remember, nitrogen levels or something. And it showed that in nature, in the system that we lived in, it's one giant closed ecosystem and everything's interconnected. And so you have cause and effect relationships. And it was at this time they uncovered the hole in the ozone layer, and they started to uncover climate change. And so anyway, the thing is that I remember this, and it was only a few years later that there was this really tragic tsunami that hit Southeast Asia. And obviously, being an Australian, it affected us quite a lot there. And I at the time, though, when I kind of learned this everything is interconnected thing, I was really like, it made sense. It was like the missing piece of the puzzle had fit together. But then I was really pissed that nobody had told me this. I was like, why don't I know this? Like, I turned to everybody else in the class and I was like, oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind. And half the people in the room were like, you know, I was like, no, not, like, wow. It's like, and so actually, I've told this story so many times, but there was a guy there sitting next to me, and he was like, Leyla, I don't know why you're freaking out. Like, freaking out is obviously something I do quite frequently. And he was like, you know, it's not like any of these catastrophic environmental impacts will affect us in our lifetime, so why should we care? Like, this is a direct quote. It's like etched into my brain. And I was like, oh, I'm going to make you care. And for the rest of my life, since then, I've basically kind of looked at design as this tool that can be used to wield great power and great catastrophe, intentionally or otherwise. And so, you know, kind of my work is really about exploring that relationship. So I ended up quitting design school and becoming a sociologist, and then going back and doing my PhD in design, because I wanted to merge these two things together, like the human experience, like the wonderful, confusing thing that is the human experience, and the outcome of our creative endeavors, design, and the relationship that those two things have on affecting the planet and our ability to sustain ourselves into the future on this planet. And so my kind of life goal is for us to figure out how we can be a regenerative force, which is that once we've figured out how to be sustainable in the sense that we are not taking more than we need, but we can actually figure out with all of our technological capabilities and intellect and population numbers, how to be a positive force back on the planet, to give back more than we take as a species, because that's how we will ultimately be successful in sustaining our species for a longer period of time. So yeah, that's kind of the funny story of how it all happened.
There's like 7 avenues I want to go out right now. So part of me wants to define design versus innovation. Like when you talk about design, because I don't know that people fully, like we throw that word around a lot, and in your world it's really clear, but I think in the business world, I'm not sure that it's really fully locked in yet what we mean by that. And we often
so design is basically can be looked at from multiple perspectives. It depends on the philosophy that you're coming from. But as a kind of very basic level, design is the construction of new things out of the things around us, right? So you create a physical product or service that creates functionality and value. So the difference between, say, art and design could be argued that art can be purely aesthetic, can be functional as well, but very rarely is design just aesthetic. It has to be functional. If you design a chair with 2 legs that doesn't hold people up, then it's no longer an artifact that is of value. And most design is done on a commercial level, right? It's designed to sell a service or a function to the market to have value for the people creating it. And so you can obviously design a physical good. You can design a cell phone or a car or a couch or sunglasses, but you could also design services. So you can design what we call like user experience design, or how somebody moves through a store, wayfinding, how an individual navigates through the menus on a website or an app, or any of these things. They're all constructed experiences created with the intent to achieve a particular outcome, right? So most of the time the outcome is getting people to buy something or getting people to use something. And so that's like with this intent. So design has an intent to it that's very clear and definable. Sometimes the intent is aesthetics, like a lot of interior design. Of course, there's functional, like you need a space to be, you need things to sit on, and you need a warmth, or you need, but a lot of the time there's an aesthetic driver. But very much, if you have a cushion that doesn't have anything inside it, it's not functional any longer, right? So the functionality is the kind of essence of design. And then of course you have, like you said, innovation. And innovation is like creating something new. I think there's a lot of crossovers between design and innovation, but the difference is innovation can be anything for any purpose, I would say, whereas design is often with this really clear intent to create an outcome that achieves something very specific, whereas sometimes innovation just emerges, right? I'm not saying that design doesn't just emerge, and I think that there is a lot of crossover between those two. But let's just take an example. Like if you're a company and you sell a particular product into the marketplace, okay, and that's what you're known for, and then you start to acknowledge that your sales dropping and that customer preferences are changing, and so you need a new product to be able to maintain your economic position. So you might put up an R&D department, and you would get a series of marketers and designers and creative problem solvers to work on creating something new to sell to your clients. Now, the act of putting that together and going through the creative process and coming up with this new idea, I guess what we would say is innovation. But the practical element, the thing, the widget and how it works, and its form and how it's created and how it's manufactured and how it's packaged and how it's sold and what happens if it breaks, all of those things are design. And you have a product designer or an engineer, you might have a graphic designer, and so that's kind of like how I see the difference, is that perhaps the process of creating something new is innovation, whereas the actual practical element of the things in the world and how we interact with them and how they speak to us, that's design. But there's also a very kind of bigger philosophical theory that everything is designed, that it is an emergent outcome of the elements that exist within the system. So plants are designed in the sense that they kind of come out of the system, as do ideas. They kind of, like a lot of the time, if I'm going to do a design project, I'm going to take in lots of inspiration. I'm going to seek out things that worked and didn't work. I'm going to do research, and that's all going to percolate in my brain. And then it's going to pop out a bunch of ideas that are an emergent outcome of the things that I absorbed, the knowledge that I have. So, there's multiple layers. But for me, I see design as this silent social scripter, this thing that kind of is constantly speaking to us in a very subversive way. Most of our experiences of the world are not uncomfortable because of design, but bad design or a broken system is often what we encounter and get agitated or respond to, like a chair that doesn't work. Like, if you ever go to sit on an office chair and there's one wheel missing, come on, we all know how frustrating, kind of fall off the chair, or if your cell phone suddenly stops working and freaks out, or so it's like we don't notice design until something breaks in it. And I think for a lot of people, they don't realize that a lot of their life is completely constructed and influenced in these very subversive ways. So
That's
like
what
if you just,
I think the conscious understanding or appreciation of design. So as you're doing your work on the sustainability level, but also in the organizations that you work with, do you think people have come to really appreciate design as this tool that you see as so powerful as you see it? Or do you think they're still locked into, I have a vase that was designed, or I have a, you know, a
I
technology?
think it really depends. Like if you ask 10 people on the street, some people will have a more sophisticated view and other people's probably haven't even thought about it. So
I guess
I
sometimes
think
it's design thinking, right? In the business world, the world of design thinking has been part of that wave to try and get people to understand that we could, you know, intentionally design something, and that there's a process around being able to do that. There's an experimenting and an empathy and a
design
iteration.
thinking different intent than that. But design thinking as a fragment of the very complex field of design as a profession is a simplified version of, it's like paint by numbers basically. So you don't have to have a design degree to be able to go through the process of exploring a problem, ideating, coming up with ideas, testing that, and then seeing if it works. But I think, you know, most people who do design thinking probably couldn't create a product that was manufacturable and sellable on the market. That's just the reality, right? Like, because the purpose of design thinking is to come up rapidly with ideas that meet a particular problem. And so it's like anything, it fits one particular field, and it certainly has helped to liberalize the idea of design. But it also kind of is also minimized it a little bit too, because most people, they think design thinking, which by its very name is a way of thinking that is designerly. It is not necessarily the profession or the professions of design, which, you know, people go to university for 4 to 6 years to become an architect, an interior designer, a landscape designer, a fashion designer, graphic designer, UX designer, product designer. You know, there's like 10 different types of professional fields that people have all different skills, experiences, they use different softwares, they have different expertise about materials and manufacturing processes. So I think on one hand, it's been great to like get people excited and engaged with this creative practice. But on the other hand, it's also kind of minimized this incredibly powerful field of professional skills that have all different backgrounds and reasons why they exist. Like industrial design came out of the Second World War, need to create not just functional, but also marketable products and some planned obsolescence. And that's how we got to the waste crisis. So, you know,
but where I would like, so if we were sitting in a bar having this like conversation, you know, part of what I would probably interject though is I do think that for organizations that get really locked in a really long R&D process, and they weren't able to be very agile around that, and they weren't able to be very fluid around that, what the design thinking, you know,
breaks people out of their silos for sure. Yeah,
well,
I think it really
sense and respond more effectively and faster, right? It gives them a way to think about things that don't have to be so locked and so perfect and so rigid that they can't take in any input and then are actually less relevant.
But this is like any of the thinking sets that I think are really useful. Design thinking, systems thinking, life cycle thinking. These are all tools that help you break the silos of rigid, reductive, linear thinking, for sure. Very powerful tools. And I think that in combination, those three particularly do operate as a really powerful tool of innovation for better outcomes, right? Whether it be more efficient, more sustainable, more desirable, for sure. I completely agree, especially if you take a life cycle thinking approach, for example, understanding.
Let's talk about life cycle thinking.
Sure. So that's where you understand the whole of life environmental impact or social impact of a product or service. So everything that's created has a life, from the extraction of raw materials, manufacturing, packaging and transportation, use and end of life. It's like the secret story that you and I could tell about our entire lives, of how our parents met to how we live today and what our goals are for the future. But it's for a product, because everything that's created comes from nature at some point and must go back. And they have different processes, and it's in those interactions that the environmental or social impacts occur. So by kind of mapping that and understanding those interfacing elements, and especially the larger aspects to that, we kind of figure out where the biggest environmental impact area is and how to change that, and also get like what we call like a base case on the linear economy. And when we look at another concept, the circular economy, which I'm happy to explain, but essentially you have to understand the status quo to be able to convert it, right? So, you know, as a tool, like if I was to do a design project to understand how to change a product that is currently not great for the planet or for people into a more sustainable or circular one, I would definitely use life cycle thinking. I would definitely use systems thinking, and I would use design thinking for sure. Like I would use the act of rapid ideation to figure out how to kind of test the boundaries and push at the edges. But in isolation, I think any of those tools by themselves predominantly don't get to an outcome that's better than the past. That's my professional opinion. And I'm of the opinion that as well, like any skill set that, like any, how do you explain, like anything takes time. Like I would say anything worth doing requires work, right? It takes time to become good at something. And so any of these streamlined processes, they offer this really great quick version, but they don't necessarily offer the depth of something. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just is what it is, right? And so I think it's important to understand that. So understand, for example, life cycle thinking is based off life cycle assessment, which is a very complicated, very useful and powerful, expensive, time-consuming scientific assessment. But the thinking element is just the kind of quick, we call it quick and dirty understanding. So there's these layers to things, right? So I feel like it's the same with design thinking. There's layers to it, like understanding how to, break out of silos rapidly, push at the boundaries, come up with new ideas, excellent. Create systemically more effective, possibly revolutionary things.
Now let's talk about systems thinking for a second. So I think because I think what's so interesting is you've taken on 3 areas that all need much deeper understanding, right? And you've woven them together, to your point, because they're more powerful together. But just spending time helping people understand that we're designing our entire world and the way in which we operate in it, helping people understand sustainability and really understand life cycle, and having people understand systems and the complex nature of how things are connected and how we can impact that. They're all really big topics.
Actually, they're quite intuitive, because that's the thing I've learned over 15 plus years of teaching people this stuff, and myself, is that it's very intuitive. Like once you open up to it, your brain's like, oh, I get this, right? Systems. We are a system. Our body is made up of systems. We are interacting with systems. The world is one big complex system made up of subsystems. Like it's not that hard to understand that things have relationships. And actually that's what systems thinking is at the very fundamental level about. It's about seeing relationships between things and the effect they have versus the obvious elements of the system, right? So there's a theory called the iceberg model, which we use a lot, is saying it's the tip of the iceberg, right? So the bit that we see versus the rest, the mass that holds it up. And the very base of that, in a systems thinking mindset, the thing that often reinforces the tip of the iceberg, is the mental models or the mindsets of the people that are constructing the world. So then that's where design comes in, because you go, well, if it is this case that we create a thing for the world and in turn create this relationship, this is evidence in some really classic examples, okay? Like the tech sector, one that you've worked a lot in, Nancy, has had, and maybe it's gotten better in the last few years, has had a major issue with, what's it called? Gender politics, right? Gender bias, okay? So until recently, Google had 70% white men working for them. And this was evidenced by the issue when Siri and the other assistant tools were first programmed. They had no consideration for very female experiences such as sexual assault. If you asked Siri, she said that's not a thing because it was programmed by a particular type of person who had their own biases, right? So the thing is that we create things and then they in turn create us. So then imagine there's a young woman who's had a problem. She uses this device to try and get help. And the device tells her it's not a problem. That in turn then reinforces the problem of people not reporting sexual violence. So you see, this is like A, systems thinking problem, and B, also a design problem, because those two things are intersecting in quite profound ways. So for me, systems thinking is just being able to see the relationships and being able to understand them. And like from my approach to how I design problem solving kind of interventions is to always suspend the need to solve at the beginning and to really explore the system that is happening. So those unobvious elements become more they become more of the fuel for the creative problem solving, right? Because there's this default switch that humans, they think they know the solution before they've really understood the problem. And that creates very simplistic outcomes. And I think we're seeing a big shift at the moment, certainly when it comes to the recent very timely and important uprising around racial issues. We're seeing the conversation shift to being about the systemic elements of this. And I think it's resonating with a lot of people because that's what I mean. It's intuitive. Of course, this has been a structural problem. This is a design problem. Like, everybody who knows the lineage of this problem today, this is all by design of the police force, design of zoning.
I know. And just so you know, FYI, I've had my own awakening going, how did I not know this? How did I not know about the Tulsa massacre? How did I not know that that was like the policing came from making sure that slaves stay on their plantations? Like it was a very, like I've had my own like thing and really, because we talk about that stuff, but I wouldn't actually realize how it was engineered into, which is a whole nother word, into the system in order to design for, you know.
So actually the system is working very well. It's doing what it was designed to do.
Exactly.
But it's not actually, because there's collateral damage. And this is exactly the same conceptually as the massive environmental issues we face, because our economic system was designed to extract and exploit nature and humans, actually, because our entire economic system requires essentially people to be locked in slavery. And in nowadays, that is in the agricultural sector and obviously in the waste processing and manufacturing sectors. But it's through exploitation that we can maximize profits. And ultimately, you know, when you look at the whole economic system, the big issue is that we have externalities, and externalities are things that are accounted for in the current model, and the model is GDP. And those externalities are things like, well, obviously all waste, whether it be pollution, but also any services provided for free in the economy. So child rearing, caring for family members, selling secondhand goods is not accounted for in GDP. So nor is extracting materials from nature. And therefore, nature has no value in our current economic model, which means that it is designed to exploit that because there's no value. So in essence, what we've done is we've created a system, an economic model that's only been around for the last 75 years, that has essentially motivated all agents in the system to continue to exploit for their own benefit. And so when you look at it like that, you can start to see how unsustainability is a systematic element of a poorly designed system. And so, you know, whether it be rectifying the horrendous decisions of the past or those of the present, we have to understand the systemic relationships. Otherwise, we end up just, you know, what one really great systems thinker, Peter Senge, says is, you know, we create like every problem today was yesterday's solutions. So, you know, my goal is to give people the tools to make sure that the solutions they come up with don't become tomorrow's problems.
And I feel very strongly in the technology world, right? This is part of why we're doing so much of the work that we're doing, is to try and ensure, because the way I think about it is the problems that we created in the 20th century industrial economy are bad enough that if we start to apply that same thinking to a 21st century one with exponential technologies, it will be so much worse. Like we just, I feel very strongly that we need to rethink about how we approach what we're doing, because we will have so much more power than we even did before.
Right. So then how do you feel that the disruptions of the kind of like last 6 months will change that? Because I feel like the complete upheaval of so many stable systems has really created space for change, right? So I'm intrigued because, you know, values get realigned and all sorts of things happen.
We describe it a lot as awakenings, right? There have been these awakenings, and what we choose to do with those is they're not necessarily shifts. They're not shifts until we choose to make them shifts, but we cannot unlearn what it is that we have been able to see now around how a digital environment, like literally it's been the case of survival. All the reasons that we were told we could never do these things online have now become the only way that we can survive. And so suddenly we had to jump in. And so hopefully our curiosity is open to, well, gosh, what would VR look like? And what would AR look like? And how can we design them in ways that we actually think they work with us? I still remember so clearly the debate you had with my oldest son in the kitchen about the world of VR that you thought was so horrifying and he thought was fantastic. Everything that you described as being, you know, the apocalypse, he was like, that just sounds better and better. So I do think,
well, I think the point is that I'm not into this singular idea. I just get very overwhelmed by this. When people in the tech world, they get very, very enthusiastic about one thing and it becomes like a tunnel vision. And so, you know, being a disruptive person, it's my intent to challenge people, but it's like education, right? Like I teach a lot. And I can teach online, and I'm really learning to enjoy it because I don't have any other options. But I would be very dismayed if the future of education was predominantly online, because we know humans are social animals, and we need oxytocin, which is only really, really triggered properly through proper social interaction. And social skills and the behavior that we have online versus in real person is astronomically different. We can get away with a lot more things, even if it's just turning your video off without saying excuse me or doing any of these kinds of things. Whereas in the real world, you get socially reprimanded in different ways that helps you become a better person.
Well,
And so
I'm going to go with a yes and on that one, because I sit there and say the train has left the station, right? We're going to be in a digital economy whether we like it or not. And so the question becomes, how do we get better at accepting a fluidity between them and don't assume that it's only this or only that, right? Because we can also take all the advantages. To your point, you can reach more people now. They don't all have to be in the physical space.
Yeah, the hybrid model, I think, is the thing that we need to figure out. And actually, it's something that I've been personally thinking about a lot, because I'm interested in how we can create more effective educational environments, especially in a time of social distancing and the kind of just reality of needing to have less people in one space and being more conscious of potential impacts around getting people to share things, even like just thinking about like a shared bunch of pens. It's
right? I mean, so everyone talks about seeing movies now where you see crowds or you see people touching things, and we all get like freaked out.
Like, no, don't do that, don't do it. No, I know it's like, actually I still have that thing now. My brain has been so wired digitally that if I see a map on a piece of paper, I go to do this, and every time I'm like, brain, come on, we're smarter than this. This is the real world brain. But that's one of the things I think is super important, because like I was talking earlier about design, and there's this whole kind of field now called dark patterning, which I'm sure you're aware of, which is the use of design as a manipulative tool in digital environments, right? So there's a great website where this guy is essentially like, he collects stories of manipulative digital experiences. So the airlines got in trouble for it, the opt out versus opt in. But then there's like really insidious things like the fact that continuous scroll is based off a slot machine and it triggers the same neurological response. And a lot of these kinds of features of subversive design within a digital environment, because the human brain is very easily tricked, right? Apple did it with the scafomorphic design. So with their first range of digital experiences were designed to look exactly like the real world thing. So you remember the yellow ledger notepad, that was a whole design style that they've now moved away from. But ultimately, like, so design is this like very powerful tool that we are often not aware of, right? And so this, like my little example of my brain wanting to do this to a map is a classic case of how it has a problem in seeing the difference between these two things, because they are designed to look so similar. And that's the same that they're saying about kids who are getting exposed to 2D surfaces, like interactive surfaces, before more 3D, is that their brain is just basically seeing that as the dominant versus the 3D real world. So I just think that there's a lot of things to be cognizant of and respectful of, and like anything. And one of my favorite things that you said when you came to teach at my school was that in a digital environment you could stalk people or serve people, and I feel like that's such a thing I always think of. It's like anything, you know, you can use a hammer to build a house or to kill someone, and that's the same. Like, these tools are so powerful and so influential and can have astronomically positive impact on our lives, but equally they can have very manipulative, subversive, and sinister
100%.
impact.
And that's why, again, I talk about the fact that getting the awareness and the work that you do and the work that other people do to help us all understand. Again, I always go back to put humans at the center of it, and you really do think about who you're designing for and really think about the impact, and you think about externalities, not just in terms of waste, but also in terms of just for the future generations. Like, how do we want people to feel about this work that we're doing, and how are we manipulating them? I always get frustrated when parents get really, really mad at their kids for being on their devices all the time. Like, do you understand the billions of dollars that went into creating that addictiveness, right? These kids are supposed to be like pushing away the technology that was designed to do all those things to make them sort of attached to it.
Not
So
just kids, adults too, Nancy. Like,
well, no, I agree, but I think but we reprimand children for somehow not. But I'm just saying they're even more vulnerable to your point, and the fact that we reprimand, we can feel as though that we shame them around these habits that I think that have been designed into them. And so I think this literacy.
Think about like the transition from childhood to adulthood. We go, before even technology, we would go from play to work, right? And it's similar. If children see that their parents are on a computer or a device all day doing work, well, why shouldn't they be on a computer or device all day doing play? Because these, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like we often misalign our own behaviors and with our values. But actually, you made me think of something. I think it's really important to always be aware of values and ethics and morals, because obviously these are constructed in our environment. But the point that you just made, like human-centered design, like human-centered design, which is a wonderful invention mainly by Dan, what's his last name? Anyway, I think that the thing is like, of course, you can put a human at the center of something, and you can design a life-changing device, like our friend Elliot and the mind reader thing that he did, which is not a very good description. I'm sorry, everybody who's watching. Not
reader, right?
That's it. But you can also put a human at the center and design something to manipulate them, and something that essentially entraps them. And that's what I'm saying. And you know, at the end of the day,
yes, totally agree with the overlap.
And when I work with designers and tech teams, they actually say to me, well, the brief told me to do it, therefore I had to do it. Like, I've had designers say the throwaway toaster that I had to design, I knew it was wrong, but I did it. Or the packaging that, you know, is completely unrecyclable, that is designed to basically look really sexy, but be a complete travesty for the environment. But they say, but my client made me do it, and I need my job. And there's a lot of externalization of the responsibility
100%.
of the impact of our actions as creatives or as professionals, whatever sector we're in. And I think that's the really big issue that we need to tackle, is like, what's the collective moral stance on this? Because just because we put a human at the center, or we put nature at the center, it doesn't matter, because ultimately it's the essence of what you're trying to achieve that will create the outcome. So that's why I like sustainability, because it's social, economic, and environmental as like 3 equal parameters of your decision making. Like, what are the impacts to the economics, what are the impacts to the humans, and what are the impacts to the planet? And in considering that more holistic view, we can make choices that have economic benefits, that don't exploit people, and that have potentially positive benefits to the planet. And if I had anybody who argued against that to my face, I would feel very obliged to get them to assess their own values. Like, do you go home and look at your kids and say, you know what, I really want to fuck the planet up for you guys, because, you know, I just don't like you enough to care about these things. That's how it feels. Or, you know, if I knew that every time I bought something, a 5-year-old kid was having to, you know, deal with the plastic sniff tests for the recycling at the end of life, because a lot of cheap plastic products come from a, you know, anyway, whatever, I could go into the details. The point is that I think that the bigger issue here is about value and morale and ethics. And these are conversations we don't have enough still. And, you know, I think it's in business or in our own professional roles, you know, and that's actually kind of one of the things with the Unschool we talk a lot about, is kind of that it's about integrity, right? It's about how to maintain integrity, but your own life and then the life you do. And I think this is changing. have been doing a project about this. And I think that the different generational shift, the purpose alignment, and that ethical value alignment, like we've seen all the activism from Amazon workers around climate change and about health and safety. Like, COVID has thrown up all of these things where it's like, what, I'm not valuable to you? I'm your employee and you don't even give me PPE, and you know that other people here have been infected. So I think that that's really shifting, and companies are being held more accountable for their moral stance on not just how they treat their workers, but how they work in the supply chain, and ultimately the responsibility they have on their products. And that's really, I think, one of the key interesting things that's happening right now, is that the power is shifting from being very much like the company is in control to the agents that are operating within it, in where the workers or the shareholders as customers as well. So, you know, I think that there's big changes happening right now, and I think we're going to see more of them. But I think that as long as we ignore the ethics of what we do, then it's very easy to assume what we're doing is right until we discover it's wrong, which is a bit unfortunate, you know.
So what, you know, there are days I hit the wall and I think, God, this is all so overwhelming, and we're, you know, how are we going to find our way through? And then I do think about history, and I think about the Roaring '20s followed the pandemic in 1918. So I figure we might be in for a really, you know, phenomenal point. But when I started,
great dresses.
Right, we've already started. We want to start. I have another girlfriend. We want to start like the whole Roaring '20s club for the 2020s, and we're like, oh my God, it'd be so much fun. So I do imagine that there will be a, you know, some sort of upside. But I also I do try and figure out like, where is the hope, right? And we're working on tools like an alternative to GDP that will help be more holistic, because I do think that's a huge lever, right? It goes right back to, you talk about the system, like right at the center of the system. And so when you look at the work that you're doing, for me, the pandemic has woken us up, certainly around the environmental stuff. We see that our, you know, behaviors have an impact on the planet. It's like really, really clear when everything stops. It came at an economic cost, which is not, you know, something we can ignore, but we do see it now. So I guess the question is, as you look at the horizon and the work that you're doing, or, you know, now and moving forward, what gives you the most hope, and where are you putting your energy into? making things different?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I have similarly schismatic responses to things based on numbers of factors. But I personally think that we're all allowed to have like a 2020 existential crisis. Like that's pretty. It's a get out of like normality free card.
Hard and good.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to go through that. I mean, to not sound cliche, these are very challenging times, you know, like personally, I had to completely change all of my projects and businesses and, you know, go through a lot of personal turmoil and can't go back to my home country because they've got a quota right now. I can't even get in if my family gets sick, you know, so there's all sorts of like personal challenges that we have to face. But on the professional level, on the kind of bigger picture level, I think that there's so much unknown. Like, you know, my theory of the future is that it's made up of the actions today. So, you know, we're seeing that as well, like each country or each city even, how more affected they're getting based on the actions or precautions, or if they put in mandates on face masks. So we're seeing this in real time, right? Like cause and effect relationships. So I find hope in that, like, because I'm a researcher as well. So when I see all these different things happening at the same time, that makes me excited, because I think the scarier thing is if there's just like one homogenous, you know, pathway of like no deviation. And so, of course, the disruption, the chaos, the uncertainty, these cause a lot of anxiety and feeling of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? But there's so much in that as well, right? Like, I feel like because the future is undefined, we're given an opportunity to make it something completely different than where it was going just 6 months ago. And I find the possibility that more and more people, no matter what their political ideology is, are being reassessing their values, whether that be that families is very important to them. I've read so many articles of dads who didn't get to spend time with their kids, and now they're like, I'm not going back to work and every day where I don't get to see my kids, and they've got this bonded experience. Or you've got stories of people who, you know, had a crappy job that they got paid really well, but now they don't have to do it, and they're kind of reassessing their whole life. And then as well, you have very tragic stories of people who are being very affected by this, which is making governments take responsibility for their citizens and be held accountable for the social security that every citizen should be entitled to. So I'm hoping that we see some realignment around that. So there's so many things that I think bring about potential positive outcomes. And I think it's really about using forces to drive those so that we have a collective progression to something better versus a kind of digression. But at the same time, you know, there is a lot of loss happening at the moment. It's a reality. People are going through very tragic experiences, and I don't think we should ignore that or be immune to it. You know, it is hard. It's sometimes you hear stories of friends and or family, and it's heartbreaking. It's not like we can take an immunity pill to being human. And so I think it's really important to be optimistic, because we have a lot to be optimistic about, but also be like present in the reality of the day. You know, like shit's not great for everybody. So you've got to give yourself and other people space around that. And I do think that there's something very hopeful in that. I know it sounds really cheesy, but the more that you can accept the world, and the more that you can experience it for all of its good and its bad, the more present and the more connected with the things around you are, you know? So for me, I feel like, you know, there's moments where I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't even figure out what's up or down. And then I kind of work through it, and usually the outcome is always incrementally better than before. So that's what we're going for, right? That the progressive development. You know, these hard times should bring good outcomes if we all embrace the challenges that we're facing rather than ignore them or avoid them.
So I think that I completely agree, right? And you know, I wrestle once in a while with the dark side, just because I feel like we know more, right? We're better prepared than people who aren't, who don't study this work and haven't thought about this stuff and don't see the solutions. They can't see what's on the horizon. So for folks that don't get to spend as much time in your world seeing what is possible, where is a resource that you put so much of your work online for free for people to be able to see? It's a big part of your ethos and your values of what it is that you create. You always make sure that there's a piece that is accessible to others. So if we were going to offer some direction and put a link in here about where people could go and find out something that could help them build those solutions that you and I imagine is possible, where would you want to direct them?
Well, I mean, like you said, I mean, we have a bunch of resources that we've created for different things, whether it be education or just own personal development. We have a superpower kit and all sorts of stuff. So I did just summarize them all together on my Medium. But I mean, I think it depends what people are looking for. Like if you're teaching kids right now, my circular economy classroom book, it's like really fun and cool and great for anyone in a teenage space. Or if you personally are just thinking about how to, be more sustainable in your life. I developed a tool with the United Nations called the Anatomy of Action, which is like everyday lifestyle choices that help bring about more sustainable living. So yeah, I think if you want to put that,
what I meant to do earlier, and just say again, for the world to know that you were one of the youngest, I think, UN environmental champion recipient, and that was a part of the launch.
I'm not that young anymore, Nancy.
I'm
not that young anymore. I don't think I'm the youngest by far.
And your TED Talk keeps getting more and more views. I saw again it was like 1,400,000 or something yesterday on paper versus plastic. But yeah, so the tools that you built through the UN, and I saw that the hands and the 5 steps. It's great. It's super accessible.
Well, you'll have something to take action with every day. So look, I think that's the thing, right? Actually, in doing that project, I really learned because my goal was to find the actions that, if magnified across many people, would have a really significant positive impact. And so there's like the simple one of protein swaps, and I don't expect everybody to be vegetarian, but you can protein swap in your daily life choices, which has total price signals. So there's lots of these, tangible actions. So, and look, the thing is, at the end of the day, there is so much out there to kind of grab onto, but I know it can be overwhelming. So if anything, that's one of the reasons we created the Unschool and like a place for that. And we're working on a kind of community-based app at the moment to help kind of connect more people who are positive, want to have a positive mindset about the future and learn the tools of doing that. So, I think that a lot of the time seeing other people do these things is really inspiring, and I'm inspired by people like you. And so it's like, we've just got to be more proactive in sharing ideas and community and connecting and supporting each other in the challenging, wonderful times that we're in.
So. Amen. Until we can all end up in a Roaring 20s bar together. So until then, honey, I'm wishing you the best of luck. Anybody who's watching this, Leyla's moving to the UK, to London. So seek her out. She will be excited to make new friends there as you start this next venture. And I want to come see you there. So
yes, do. When airplane travel is.
Yeah, I'm playing again. I am counting down the days where I can run off and go do things. And in a year, I'm an empty nester sister, so I can go anywhere in the world for as long as I want. So
I heard that thank
you so much. Again, I was saying before we even started this call, but I'm so grateful that we started this series during the pandemic, because it gives me the thing that I need, that injection of, not just optimism, but like, tangible ways of thinking about this stuff that I can hold, and stories I can tell with others that help us. So thanks for your time, my love.
My pleasure. It's great to connect with you again.
Wishing you the best and everything. Well, let's stay in touch, not wait 3 years in between. Just saying. Mwah.